Whispers. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the final Story Sundays of this month of a new video every day. For today's video, I was kind of debating with myself what I should talk about because I have a lot of things that I could talk about, but at the same time, there are a lot of things that I don't like talking about, if you know what I mean, because they're like personal, in-depth type of stories, which sometimes aren't very easy to talk about. So at first I thought that I would do a video about my art, how I got into art. And then I was like, nah, I'm not really in the mood to talk about that. And then I was like, oh, maybe I can make a video about my dad. But then I realized that I kind of did that already in 2012. And I already made a video on my vlog channel, Ilse the Water Drops, where I talk about what I did after my dad died. So I got a question from one of my viewers, one of my Dutch viewers. The person is called Onito91. And the person wanted to know about my anxiety. So I'm going to be answering some questions about anxiety today. And when I basically found out about when I had anxiety, how it all got started, because all my anxiety stories are pretty much connected, because they all lead back to one really big event that happened early in my life. And from there on, everything just became a chain reaction and everything started snowballing down the hill, which led to multiple anxiety attacks throughout my 28 years of life. Pretty much 24, because I would say it started when I was 4 years old. So let's get started. So the first question that I got from this person is, how do you call anxiety attacks in Dutch? Well, anxiety attacks are angstaanvallen in Dutch. So, Anita, if you want to know that, they're called angstaanvallen. So let's get started with the story. The first question, I have a little note that I wrote some things down. So the first question that I got was, when did you find out you had anxiety? Well, to be honest with you, I found out that I had anxiety years after everything took place. I cannot recall when I was younger that anyone ever told me that I had anxiety, so I always felt very alone in that sense. Nobody ever told me I had anxiety, I believe. The only thing that I always heard through multiple phases in my life was that I was traumatized, considering the things that I've been through when I was a kid. So I found out that I had and have been having anxiety attacks years later, when I was older and I was able to put things into perspective. That's when really the things really started to unfold in front of me. So yeah, that's kind of hard to answer when I found out that I had anxiety. But I would say that it became really clear to me that I suffered from anxiety attacks a few years back, when I got into my eating disorders and everything started to connect in my head, and I started to understand the bigger picture of how something in your childhood can happen and how that can haunt you down in your adult life when you become older, and memories can get triggered that you forgot about, which can lead to anxiety attacks. So the second question is, how and when did you find out it was anxiety? Well, comes down to the previous question. It's kind of hard to answer that for me, but let me just tell you my first memory that I've had of some really severe anxiety attacks. Really, really severe. I honestly thought I was going crazy and that I belonged in an institution. That's how bad it was. So let me tell you, like I mentioned in my previous Story Sunday videos, is that I got emotionally and physically abused by my mom until the age of 3 years and 9 months old. And in the first 4 years of your life, you're supposed to receive a lot of love and a lot of comfort and a lot of safety and security. And if you don't have that, it can leave you with a lot of unprocessed emotions and things that you never would have thought would happen after such an event. So when I was 3 years and 9 months old, I was really, really traumatized. I learned at a very young age how to talk. So I would tell my dad the stories of when I would be with my mother, because I used to visit my dad in the weekend, I believe, until I was 3 years and 9 months old, because my parents were divorced already at a very young age. So, let me have a look. So when I was 3 years and 9 months old, I got to live with my dad. And I told my dad all the stories about my mother. My mother was schizophrenic. She was also abused physically and emotionally by my grandpa. And my grandpa was physically and emotionally abused by his father. So this goes back a few generations. It's like a generational thing. So I got to live with my dad. And until the age of 7 years old, my sister would always come and visit us. At the time when there was a trial in, I think, 1991 or 1992, there was not enough evidence that my sister got abused as well. And that's the reason why she stayed with my mother and I got to live with my dad. So until I was 7 years old, my sister would always stop by at our house. My mother would drop her off and she would spend the weekend with us. So my mother, when I had to cry, when I was a little kid, when I was a baby, she would slap me in the face. And she would have all sorts of men over at our house when I was living with her at the time. And she would lock my door until she had enough rest and enough sleep. So I would be stuck in my room until she would come out of bed. So I had to pee in my room, I had to poop in my room, I had to do pretty much anything in my room until my mother would take me out, because I couldn't get out of the room myself. And I remember that my grandma told me later down the road in my life that there were some neighbors living in the area where I used to live with my mom that would always be able to see me standing in front of the window all alone. And that I didn't look very happy, which obviously makes sense. So I have no idea of all the things that I've seen when I was 3 until I was pretty much 4 years old. I do know that I was a very quiet kid in general, because I would always get punished when I would cry. And then pretty much when I got to live with my dad, around the age of 4, I really started to become a rebel. I was uncontrollably angry all the time. I would grab my t-shirt like this, and then I would start to bite holes in it when I was a kid. I was always scared to go to elementary school when the time was there, when I had to go to elementary school, because my mother dumped me on the street, and my dad was pretty much the one who saved me. I always had the feeling that my dad would leave me. So if he would go to the bathroom, I would wait in front of the door. When I had to go to school, he would stay with me for a good hour in the classroom, and when he would leave, I would always freak out. I would start yelling, crying, like uncontrollably. And eventually, I got a good relationship with the woman, the teacher. So she would always comfort me, and that kind of made me more comfortable. So that was pretty much even in kindergarten, this happened already. And during my elementary school phase, I was always very insecure. I got picked on, bullied at, like I said in my previous video. And I just didn't know who I was. I really didn't know who I was. I just had all these unprocessed emotions trying to come out. And because I was so young, I didn't understand them. So a parallel story that goes hand in hand with me having to go to elementary school was that my sister came to visit us every weekend until I was 7 years old. And because I thought it was normal to hit people when they don't listen to you, I started hitting my sister when she wouldn't listen to me. And my dad obviously taught me over time that that's something that's not normal, and that you can't just punch someone in the face when you don't agree with them or when they don't listen to you, right? So he fixed that. He obviously made me really, really aware of that. So over time, that stopped. I didn't hit my sister anymore after a certain amount of time. I was too young to remember when that stopped, but I do know that it stopped when I was around 7 to 8 years old. So along with these stories, my dad, on top of that, was also sick. He had diabetes, type 1, and he got diabetes from when he was 7 years old. So he always had to have he had special needs. He had to stay in the hospital when he was a little kid. And that really took its toll on my dad. But despite the fact that he had a disease himself and had to take insulin every day, he took care of me. And from a very young age, because I was so traumatized about the fact that my mother dumped me on the street, I was so scared to lose him, like uncontrollably scared, being in fear. Biggest part of the day, biggest part of my life at the time. So if I would do something wrong, my dad always told me if I would swear, for example, which my dad obviously didn't want me to do, he would tell me, you know how you sound like right now. That's what he would tell me. You know how you sound like right now. And he would always compare me to my mom, which I don't think was a very good idea, because that led to an entirely different problem. My dad, when I did something wrong, and it reminded him of my mother, he would compare me with my mother. So he would say, like, you know who you sound like right now, and that would be my mom. So when I was around 7 to 8 years old, I got so scared because I did not want to turn into my mother. I knew what schizophrenia was at a pretty young age, and I was really scared that I would turn into her. The biggest part of until I was around 13 years old, I've been living in fear, thinking like, oh my God, I hope I'm not going to turn into my mother. So the problem that came out of that is that I got so scared that I was scared that I would lose control over my body, and that I would do things, horrible things, and that I wouldn't be able to control myself with my mind. That is the anxiety that started to creep up on me when I was around 7 to 8 years old. So during this time, what happened is that I would get these anxiety attacks, and at the time I didn't know it was anxiety, so nobody could really help me with it. Nobody really told me like, oh, that's what it is, and that calmed me down. I just told my dad that I was really scared to turn into my mom, and that I was really, really, really scared, terrified to lose control over my body, and that I would do things that were absolutely terrible. So at that age, I asked my dad a few times if he could lock me up in my room, which is really, really extreme. I asked my dad if he could lock me up in my room because I did not trust myself enough to sleep with the door unlocked. So I was also really scared to lose my dad because he was sick, and I was exposed to that pretty much 24/7. When he would wake up in the morning and his sugar level was too low, I had to run downstairs to grab some candies, give it to him, and he would all be like covered in sweat and just really, really, really terrible to see as a kid. So my dad and I sometimes would eat cookies in the middle of the night together in bed because of his sugar levels. And as a kid, I thought that was kind of fun, right? But later down the road, when I became older, I understood the reasons why we had to do that. So during this time when I had these anxiety attacks, I asked my dad if I could sleep with him in bed since he didn't want to lock me up in my room. So I asked my dad, can I sleep with you in your bed? And because I was just so scared that I would do something to my dad, this anxiety, which now, years later, I understand that I was so scared to lose my dad, so scared that I much rather ended it myself than that death would just take him away from me. So the fear of losing him and the fear of not being able to control yourself at the same time led to me sleeping in the bed with my dad. And every time when he would fall asleep, I would wake him up. I'd say like, "Hey, Dad, wake up." So he didn't get a lot of sleep during that time, as you can imagine. And this anxiety attack, these specific anxiety attacks of me being scared that I would lose control over my mind and that my body would take over, lasted me until I was around 13 years old. So during this time frame, my dad would always talk into me. When I had these anxiety attacks, I would go to my dad and I would be freaked out and panicking, and I would be all over the place. And he would tell me, "You would never do something like that. You're not a bad person. You would never do anything to anyone. You would never hurt or harm anyone. You're a very kind person." And things along the line of trying to comfort me and trying to tell me that I'm not the type of person that would do something like that. I kind of learned over time how to handle the anxiety. So that was pretty much where my anxiety started. It all started when I moved in with my dad, and I got out of the phase where I knew that you can't hit people, that's not a normal thing to do, to hit your sister when she doesn't listen. And pretty much right after that, that's when I started to really, really get worried about my dad, and I really didn't want to lose him. And because of it, I was so scared that I just wanted to take care of it myself, so to say, because I was just so scared to lose him. And I didn't want it to just, lose him out of nowhere when I would least expect it. So, that was pretty much where my anxiety got started. When I was a little bit older, around 11, 12 years old, my dad got a girlfriend that hated kids. And me, at the time, I was very traumatized still, really couldn't get along with her at all. And she was really tough, and she would always tell me these stupid stories that I don't think you should tell a kid. Like, she was telling me how she got sterilized when she was like 18, 19 years old. This woman was like 15 years older than my dad. She would tell me that she got sterilized at a very young age because she hated kids. And she would always tell me that, like, these stupid stories about when I was started to get curious about like women experiencing their period and things like that. She would tell me these horrible stories of like how you would feel when you have your period, what it does to you. And she was just oh man, she was terrible. She was like the crazy stepmother that you don't want to have in your life. And so at that time, when I was 7 years old, I started horseback riding, and between 11 and 13 years old, when my dad had this girlfriend, I always had to go to horseback riding at some point during the week. And I never wanted to eat before I would go horseback riding because I was always just too nervous and anxious, but she always forced me to eat. And I think that that's probably where my anxiety for food came from at the time. That's probably where my eating disorder already got, like, I don't know how to say it, like it already got set in motion, the whole process. So because of her always trying to force me to eat, I got really, really anxious towards food. So when I was around 11 to 12 years old, I would always be hanging above the toilet right before I had to go to horseback riding because I would be so, so nervous before I had to go like to the stables and horseback ride. And despite the fact that I was already gagging, hanging in front of the toilet or above the toilet, my stepmom at the time still forced me to eat. And I don't know how that happened, how my dad just let that happen. But what I do remember is that she was always a very, very, very different person when we were together than how she would behave when my dad was around. So I would say that from the traumatization that I've experienced until I was 3 years and 9 months old, that set the whole chain reaction of anxiety in motion. That started to come out when I was around 7 to 8 years old. That's when I had the time that I wanted to sleep with my dad in the bed so that I could wake him up every time when he would fall asleep because I was scared that I wasn't able to control myself. And from that, all the anxiety and being insecure and not being good enough led to me breaking down emotionally when I had to go to horseback riding, when my dad had that girlfriend and she would force me to eat. So this is just a very small part of my anxiety story, because by now I kind of figured out how everything is connected to each other and how it's just one big chain reaction and how it just started snowballing at a certain age. So I think I'll leave it with that for today. The way how I suffered from anxiety was by feeling very anxious, just like this feeling, this pressure on your chest. That's what I would feel, and I would feel this weird lightheaded feeling, like I don't know, it kind of creeps up on you. It's just this creepy under the skin type of feeling of like you just feel that your adrenaline is pumping and you don't feel good, and all of a sudden your head just starts to overthink everything, and it's just connected to your emotions, and then your emotions try to come out, and it's just like, oh, I was just one complete mess when I was a kid because I was so traumatized. So yeah, the next question that I got from this person is, do you suffer from anxiety? I think I do at times in my life, and there are times in my life when I don't feel anxiety at all. It really depends on how I feel mentally and how much I processed things. It's very important that if you feel anxiety, that you trace back the origins. Where did it come from? How did you end up feeling this way? What triggers it? Like, being aware of the fact that you have anxiety is the first step toward getting out of it. Like, I know that there are some conditions that you can't do anything about it, but for me, personally, it was because I was so traumatized, and in all the years of my life, I've always been trying to see the full picture. So I always tried to be very objective and be very honest toward myself as much as I could. to understand where certain feelings come from, because most of the time anxiety is connected to something you didn't have, a certain fear that started growing, and that can get triggered by things that people say, things that you might see, things that you go through. Those things can come up again. So it's really important, if you experience anxiety and you know that it's probably based on something traumatizing or something that you went through, that you dig deep, go through all these layers, do that inner work in yourself, in your heart, in your body, your spirit, your mind, everything, so that you can eventually create a complete picture for yourself, and that you know where certain things came from and come from, so that you can trace them back, pinpoint them, and that you can find some sort of peace with it, and that you can reason with yourself about why you feel that way, and that it's okay to feel that way, because in the end, if you try to keep all those feelings inside of you, I always imagine it with different chapters of my life. I have different bottles that are filled up, and there are a lot of emotions that I still didn't process, that are probably still inside of me, but that I'm not aware of. But they'll be triggered later down the road in my life by certain things, and when that happens, I'll deal with it whenever it comes to me, whenever it's the right time. So yeah, that was, for today at least, my story about anxiety. This story might sound a little bit like it's all over the place, and it kind of is, because most of the time when I talk about a topic, I already closed that chapter off. Like, I always see it in my head as my life are different chapters, and I read the different chapters, and sometimes you go back to a previous chapter and you add something to it, or you erase something. And since I'm still dealing with anxiety here and there nowadays, it's really hard for me to sketch a complete picture for you of how my anxiety attacks are, and how they influence me, and how it's all connected, because that's still an ongoing process that I didn't finish yet. So despite the fact that this story was a little bit all over the place, at least that's how it sounded like to me, I do hope that it was a little bit helpful in a way, even if it's just to feel like, oh, thank God, I'm not alone. You know what I mean? Because you're not. There are a lot of people out there who experience that, and it's perfectly normal that if you go through certain things, it doesn't need to be as extreme, like, oh, you got abused by your mother. No, it could be something that someone said to you one day and that just got to you so, so bad, which just led through one big chain reaction of anxiety attacks. There is no measurement of saying like, oh, this is worse than what you have been through, for example. It's not like that, because everyone processes things in their brain in a different way, and physically, emotionally, everything. So it's really important that you recognize those feelings, and that you give yourself space to feel those, and that you're not ashamed of them or try to push them away. Just let them come out, even when you're just by yourself. Write things down. Maybe watch a video like this, for example, to just realize again, like, oh yeah, there are billions of people on this planet, and I'm not the only person who is going through this. So I hope that you found it helpful, and maybe enjoyed the video in some sort of way. And I'll see if I can do a full story about my anxiety from beginning to, well, end in between brackets, because it's always an ongoing story. I'm only 28. If you would like me to do a full story on that, please let me know down below in the description box. And for now, I would like to send you a lot of love and positive thoughts. And I'll see you again next week. Sleep well.